Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. We've got about 13 people online. So just a reminder that there's that Q&A option when you join online. So you're welcome to submit questions there, and I will try and get them to Lynn when we get to that portion of the director's cut. But I will just send it over to Lynn for May 2021 production.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for everyone that joined us in the room as well as online. We're looking at May 21 production for North Dakota and contrasting that to April production. So first of all, oil, flat as a pancake. I mean, 0.4% increase. So a little surprising there, since road restrictions had mostly come off and we were expecting more completion activity in May. I still am anticipating some improvement June, July, and August, but we continue to see serious problems with frac crews. This week, my inspectors are reporting only 8 frac crews in the field. At these prices, we would normally have 20 to 25 frac crews. So we made a few calls and we asked some questions, and they are trying with all their might to hire, but they are not finding employees that want to come back into the industry and come back to North Dakota to work on the frac crews. As you know, pre-pandemic, we were at 25, and during the deepest part of the pandemic in June, July of 2020, they went down to 1 frac crew. So many of those people were let go, and many of them appear to have left the state. And so that they are struggling, very, very difficult to find employees. So very flat on the oil production. Meanwhile, gas production went up 1%. And so again, we continue to see those increasing gas oil ratios and the pressure on gas gathering and processing infrastructure. And even when oil production remains flat, we increase the need for gas capture infrastructure and the need for future investment in gas capture. The great news there is, of course, that natural gas prices have improved substantially. Henry Hub natural gas price is approaching $4, and we've not seen those kind of prices in a good long time. So that's encouraging on the natural gas front. It also has relieved a lot of the pressure on producers and operators because natural gas liquids are following suit. I know you're paying more at the pump. Propane, butane, ethane all follow that unleaded gasoline price up. And so it is now profitable to separate out Y-grade NGLs and move them down a pipeline to Kansas or to Texas to be fractionated. And so that, that red ink problem with gas processing and gas prices has disappeared as well. All of that bodes well for the future, but our operators are being extremely disciplined in terms of adding rigs. Very slow about adding rigs. Wouldn't be any fun if we didn't report on New Mexico. So we topped them by about 140,000 a day in April, and that margin decreased to about 90,000 a day in May. So they are looming in our rearview mirror, and we'll see just how long we can stay ahead in this race. But with only 23 rigs operating here and 75 operating in New Mexico, it's going to be a severe challenge. Now, New Mexico has implemented some pretty draconian flaring regulations, and that's limiting their upside as well as the drought conditions, because it's a very, very dry place. And we're very dry here, but still, we have a lot of fresh water flowing through this state. I mean, even though there's not access to frac water in all the sloughs and little reservoirs around the state, when we had 25 frac crews operating in the state, on a daily basis, they would use about the same amount of water that flowed past Bismarck in 8 minutes. So you know, we have a lot of fresh water in this state. Not to say that we aren't working on some innovative solutions to move away from that, you know, just because it's the right thing to do. And so we're working with a couple of companies that are attempting some innovations to safely move produced water and start increasing the amount of produced water that's used in hydraulic fracturing. So gas capture, we lost a little bit of ground. We're still above the 91%, but we fell to 92%. And that's a razor thin margin. As we go into the summer, and Justin can talk a little bit more about this, I'll pass the ball off to him, I guess. But Hess has started their turnaround at Tioga. So that huge gas plant is down and is being expanded from 250 million a day to 400. And we probably would have seen, you know, very significant flaring, except that outrigger at the, I always mess up the name of the plant, but over there northwest of Williston. I'm sorry, Sanderson. At the Sanderson plant has picked up most of that. So most of that has been offloaded to outrigger through that 70-mile gathering line that they built for XTO development, which did not happen. So they had the capacity to pick that up. And so that's great news to help us get through the summer with limited flaring. Permitting is up substantially. So in June, we issued 75 permits, and we haven't been there since before the pandemic. So that's great news. As far as oil production, it's hanging right on the revenue forecast. Gas production, right on the revenue forecast. Completions, just right on the revenue forecast. So we're following everything there. The one thing that's well above is prices. So May prices exceeded the revenue forecast by about 19%, and today's prices look like they're 25% above revenue forecast. So state revenues should be extremely healthy. A new record in terms of the number of producing wells. So how did that happen with not so many drilling rigs and half the frac crews that we would, or less, that we would expect to see? And so they carved into the non-completed well, or the DUC well count, pretty substantially. It went from 731 to 677. So they're actually cutting into that. One of the interesting little aspects in the well count is, for the first time ever, we have a county with more than 5,000 active producing wells. That's McKenzie County. Never had that before. And to put that in context, in April of 2006, as they were drilling the first big Bakken well over in Parshall, statewide we had 3,525 wells. So McKenzie County all by itself has 150% of the wells that the whole state had in 2006. That's how big the expansion in McKenzie County has been. Fort Berthold has run kind of counter to the rest of the state, down 2 drilling rigs, down 19,000 barrels a day, a little bit of an increase in active wells, big decrease in wells waiting on completion. And we're going to have to look into this more. I don't have the answer for you because I just did the number this morning. But the fee area of Fort Berthold is really where we're struggling to meet gas capture. In fact, we're not meeting it. We're at 84%. And so I was asking Justin if he knew what was going on there. He doesn't have the answer off the top of his head. So we'll look into that a little bit more and see if we can figure out what's causing. That would be the area south of Newtown. You know, so it would be, you know, the Van Hook, Big Bend area that's got more flaring than normal or than one would expect. Want to make a comment about U.S. crude oil stocks. Very, very low. Okay, we're approaching the bottom of the 5-year band, and so the the impact of pretty anemic rig counts and substantially recovered demand has pulled that crude oil in storage way down. And so, I mean, we're not in desperate shape because we're still within the 5-year band, but you can see that it's been decreasing eight weeks in a row. Those inventories decreased, and worldwide inventories are decreasing. So you saw a lot of, for the first time really since the pandemic, we saw OPEC really arguing with each other about what this should look like in January of 2022. And they did finally reach an agreement, and it looks like United Arab Emirates is going to get its way. They're going to get an increased baseline, and so they're going to start increasing by 400,000 barrels per day on a monthly basis going forward. So we should see stable gasoline prices and stable crude prices. And when they were really going at each other, you saw those high 70s, but we've seen a $2, $3, $4 drop in crude prices since they came to that agreement. So it's fallen back into the low 70s. We'll see what happens the end of this year. You know, I know OPEC pays a lot of attention to U.S. shale producers, and U.S. shale producers are saying that they're going to, you know, really get to work next year. So will OPEC try to take some of that market share, you know, before U.S. shale producers have an opportunity to take it? Perhaps. And one of the reasons that they may be a little bit slow to react to these oil prices is when oil prices finally got back to profitable levels, there was a lot of hedging that took place. So there have been billions of dollars left on the table by U.S. shale producers because rather than look at market prices, they locked in prices in the mid 50s and upper 50s in hedges, and most of those run through the year. So they're not actually experiencing, you know, the huge profits that the high 70s would result in. One last piece of news, as you are aware, North Dakota filed a lawsuit against the Department of Interior, not just the Department of Interior, but also the Secretary of Interior and the head of, I gotta find it here, the director of the BLM and the director of the Montana Dakota's BLM. So we named them personally just to cover all the maps and make sure. And what it's all about is the unique impact on North Dakota of the lack of BLM lease sales. So I've laid out in my director's cut how our lawsuit differs from the Louisiana and Wyoming lawsuits. We're not just asking for a preliminary injunction. We're actually asking the North Dakota federal court to compel them to restart quarterly lease sales, to give them a deadline and say, by this date, you must start holding lease sales again. Also to prohibit them from canceling future quarterly lease sales, to enjoin the secretary from implementing a moratorium, to declare that they're in violation of the Mineral Leasing Act. So I don't know if that carries some repercussions, but perhaps it does, and to grant other relief that we think of along the way. So we'll see. We don't have a court date yet, but we'll see how that all plays out. I've also laid out in there the impact on North Dakota as we see it. So we went to the BLM website and we downloaded all of the tracts that have been nominated in Western North Dakota. There's 811. 566 of those, the NEPA's not finished, or there's an outstanding surface manager issue, you know, where like the Forest Service hasn't concurred that it should be leased, or as you're aware, you know, the Blue Buttes Spirit Quest area or Vision Quest area, you know, the surface managers there haven't agreed that that should be leased. So there are 566 that fall in that category, but there are 236 tracts that are fully vetted and evaluated and just waiting for an auction schedule. The value, and I've laid that out there, of those is over 1,000 wells and $4.8 billion of future value to the state of North Dakota. Already, 9 tracts have failed to be auctioned off, and the value of those is 20 wells and over $82 million. So we're already feeling the negative impacts of the moratorium, and hence the trigger for the lawsuit. It's similar in some ways to the Louisiana and Wyoming lawsuits, but it's different in that, as you know, in Louisiana, the court issued an injunction for them to stop canceling lease sales, but didn't give them a deadline and say you must start by. And so that's really the main difference of what we're seeking, is a court-ordered date to restart lease sales. I got a couple of maps that we can share if you're interested in, in looking at sort of how this impact plays out in North Dakota. I know they're not going to show up well on the camera, are they? You have no idea. We'll try. We'll see. Yeah, I thought it would be interesting to show you like an example. Oh,
Yep.
Can I see that?
Yep, hang on here.
Okay. And we can share these with you in a PDF, but this is an example over near Fort Union. Ooh, look at that.
That's what it looks like.
Okay.
Getting close.
So this 1920 contains 2 federal tracts. The little blue one down there is leased. The white one is unleased federal minerals. They were nominated for the March sale, and the sale was canceled. You can see the impact there. You can see the river. So under the river are state minerals. There's 2 wells that can't be drilled just because of this little piece right here. And so there's 2 wells that will not produce state-owned minerals, and they will also not produce any of these private minerals to the north and south of that little, I guess it's a 40-acre tract in Section 5 that was nominated for lease, cleared for lease, and then got canceled because of the moratorium. And that's what makes North Dakota's situation unique, is little tracts like that, bits and pieces of federal land that are scattered all around in about 3,000 of our spacing units that interfere with anywhere from 2 to 20 wells being developed in a spacing unit. I think I had another picture. See if I can find it here. Oh, what did I do with that one, Katie? I had one over east along the river. Yeah. I don't have it here. Sorry. That one there's about 186 acres, so about a quarter section, but it's stretched along the riverbank of the Missouri River. It's federal lands that were never patented, and now they're underwater, under Lake Skakawea, and they're not leased. And so that particular case, I believe they're blocking 7 wells from being drilled. So that was the analysis. We did a very detailed analysis. We went track by track and looked at how many wells were being prevented from being drilled within each of those spacing units, and how many private mineral acres and how many state mineral acres were being impacted. So we're looking forward to our day in court. I'll take questions.
Okay, any questions in the room?
On that note, what you were just talking about, I know a lot of that conversation just now was about leasing, but there were some news articles like a week or 2 ago about how permitting under the Biden administration has actually been quite high.
Mm-hmm.
What I guess, what have you observed in North Dakota in terms of federal permitting since Biden became president?
So the question from Amy was, what have we observed in North Dakota in terms of permitting? And I think I would agree. Initially, when the executive order came out, all permits had to flow to Washington to get approved. And so we saw a huge bottleneck, but that was lifted pretty quickly. And by the end of March, everything was back to normal. And in fact, we're not seeing any delays in permitting in North Dakota at all. So it's more our midterm to long-term future that's being impacted by the lease sale business. Unless, of course, you happen to be this company, and then their plans for immediately drilling out the spacing unit are being impacted. But overall, we're not seeing any restriction in permitting wells.
I have a few questions that came in online, so I'll throw one in. Any comment on a recent EIA report that said the Bakken was the only region in the US where oil production efficiency increased in 2020? Any feedback on how that efficiency has taken place or why that's the case?
Yeah, great question. So what we've seen take place in North Dakota is a major shift of some of the more marginal areas to 3-mile laterals and 1,920 acre spacing, like I showed you, versus 1,280 acre spacing. So some examples of that are up in the Powers Lake area, where 2-mile long laterals were IPing for 250, 300 barrels a day. The 3-mile laterals are IPing for close to 1,000 barrels a day. Part of that, of course, is better technology in terms of perforating and hydraulic fracturing. They've actually learned to get the same results or better results with less water and less sand. And so we have seen significant improvement in efficiency with 3-mile laterals, with better engineering and technology for perforating and hydraulic fracturing. The other thing that's unique about the Bakken, and so the other shale plays, typically when a child well is fractured within the drainage area of a parent well, the parent well actually sees a reduction in productivity. It's actually harmed by child wells. The Bakken does just the opposite. And no one has an answer for why that happens. But what actually we most often see is the parent wells get better when the child wells are drilled nearby and hydraulically fractured. So they are somehow connecting the parent wells with new rock in the process of doing that. So a couple of, well, actually 3 areas of efficiency: better hydraulic fracturing techniques, 3-mile laterals, and then the unique aspect of the Bakken and Three Forks where parents actually benefit from having children.
What, on that note, what are parent wells versus child wells? I'm just Googling this.
Okay, yes. So the question in the room was parent wells and child wells. So the parent wells are the initial wells drilled in the spacing unit, the initial 1 or 2 or 3 wells that are drilled in the spacing unit. And then as they come in to do increased density drilling, and they bring that interwell distance down from, say, 2,000 feet down to 500 or 600 feet between wells, those increased density wells we call child wells. Yeah, they're the children.
So if they go bad, you have problem children?
There you go. So, well, just like in a family, you have to frac protect the parent wells. Yeah. So teenagers are dangerous.
Yeah, question.
Question again on the lawsuit.
Yes.
I think we've talked about this some before, but just now that the lawsuit's been put together, when we're compared to a state like New Mexico, which of course has a lot more federal lands, do you have a sense for like relatively how North Dakota is affected compared to a state with so many more or so much more federal lands than North Dakota?
Yeah, thanks. And so the question was, on a relative basis, how much more would a state like New Mexico or Wyoming be affected than North Dakota? And it is significant. I mean, you can't minimize the $4.2 billion, I think, is the total potential impact in North Dakota. But a state like Wyoming or New Mexico is looking at probably 3 to 4 times that kind of impact. And so, yeah, it's big in North Dakota, but it's 4.8 billion here. But it's much, much larger in places like Wyoming and New Mexico, 3 to 4 times.
With comparison on the brain, there's another question that came in. Gotta find it again. In regards to frac crew hiring, there's been discussion about some not having difficulties in other areas. So can you kind of compare maybe some of the other shale plays and where the frac crews are going? And maybe why they're not quite coming back to North Dakota yet?
Sure. So our understanding, and it's pretty limited, because some of the companies that were involved in hydraulic fracturing in North Dakota were bought out. So for example, Liberty bought out Schlumberger's frac resources for the northern US. And so it's a little bit limited, but what's been reported to us is that most of these folks went to Texas, where activity was still higher, significantly higher than it was here, where they didn't have winter, and where there were jobs in their industry. And they are slow, if at all, they're going to come back. And there's been a more rapid turnaround, more rigs running, more frac crews running in Texas and New Mexico than in North Dakota. And so there's more than enough work down there to absorb the workforce that wants to come back. And so I'm not sure what it's going to take. Obviously, it's going to take some incentives, pay incentives and housing incentives and those kind of things to get those people to come back to North Dakota. And if we want to get back on the growth curve, like Justin's projections, we're going to have to double or triple that number of frac crews. And so it's going to take higher pay and housing incentives and that sort of thing to get them here.
If I may, you said slow to come back, if at all. Is there a concern that this might be a permanent condition for our state?
I think there is a concern, Jacob. The question was, my statement, if at all. There are some of our larger producers that have expressed to me that they're really dialing in a 1% to 2% growth number. Nothing like what's being projected for statewide. And so I think there is some concern that this could be a long-term trend, that the rhetoric about fossil fuels and all of the conversation that's going on could, at least in the near term to the midterm, discourage people from returning to work in the industry. So until we really get the worldwide inventory worked off and we really get OPEC, back where they were pre-pandemic, it's going to be hard to entice people back into the industry.
Go ahead.
I was going to just follow up on that. Any chance to do more training in state? Trying to attract people to join frac crews.
Yeah, the question was, opportunities to do training in state, and yes, I believe so. We were just getting underway with trying to find people graduating from high school that had moved here with their family and had a family employed in the oil and gas industry and were not afraid to work outdoors in that industry and to really start recruiting them into programs to train them. I think this is really a golden opportunity to do that. And we have not seen school populations really drop, but of course we disrupted education as much or more than we did anything during the pandemic. So we really lost, it really took the wind out of our sails in terms of those training programs. But that's a great question. Yes, fantastic opportunities to train young men and women that are in high school right now in Western North Dakota to be this workforce. But it isn't just frac crews. I was talking to a workover rig company just 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they were looking for 60 people and not getting applications. So it isn't just frac crews, it's also work over hands and all the above. And as we restarted our plugging program to finish out the CARES Act plugging, we started off pretty good, and then our plugging company, all their employees started getting poached. So they actually were losing crews to workover companies who were paying more. So it's a very tight work environment all the way around out there.
Kind of on the same note, I know I've just talked with you a little bit about this in the past, but you had referenced the innovative solutions that a couple companies are working on regarding fracking and water, and the drought's a bit tied up in that. But can you just kind of give us an update on what's happening with that?
Yeah, so they actually have their first frac job scheduled, and we're going to watch that. We required, before we actually started approving, on a large scale basis, a lot of transportation of produced water through lay flat hoses, that they demonstrate to us that they had developed a solution that could do that, without leaking and without contamination. So if you think about, you've probably seen the lay flat hoses out there in the road ditches, through the culverts, and over the roads and that sort of thing. And they're pretty harmless when they're just pumping fresh water. The worst case scenario is they irrigate the crop a little bit. But with produced water going through them, there have to be a lot more protections in place. And so this company has developed a system where they can put a hose inside a hose, and they can monitor not just what's going through the produced water hose, but also what's happening in that space between the hoses, and GPS locate everything and track everything on a minute by minute basis, so that we don't end up with some produced water contamination somewhere coming out as a surprise to someone. So we're taking baby steps, but by the end of this month, they should be fully up and ready to run, and they've got 2 or 3 customers. So there are some other companies that are coming in to talk to us about it. But really, the essence is to make sure that you've got a barrier within a barrier and all the monitoring necessary, so that produced water stays in the system and ends up at the site for the frac job, and not in a coulee or a field or a pasture somewhere.
And is that connected from like a saltwater disposal well site to somewhere else?
Yeah, so most of these companies have gathering systems where they pull their produced water together for disposal. And so they're going to try to minimize the length of this flexible hose that they use by connecting into those gathering systems. But typically, yes, they'll connect into a saltwater gathering system and then move that produced water 2 or 3 or 4 miles through this system to a site where they're hydraulically fracturing. I mean, they could do it by truck, but you can't logistically, physically get that many trucks on and off of a well site during a frac job hauling produced water. So you've got to have some other type of solution. And these large tanks full of produced water aren't environmentally friendly either. So we're pretty excited about this solution. It looks like a win-win-win. It looks like it will reduce costs for the people using the produced water. It will reduce freshwater use, and it will be protective of the environment in the process. So pretty smart people. Yeah.
Got sort of a 2-part question if there's still time, related, going back to the labor market issues. So you mentioned potentially the political climate is scaring people off or making it harder to attract people. it sounds like some people we're losing frac crews to other parts of the country. I guess I'm wondering, are there other factors apart from that political climate that you would attribute this labor shortage in North Dakota to? And then as a second part, has North Dakota faced this issue before, like in terms of attracting people during harsh winters and stuff like that? If that's a sort of a driving force of people or driving people away from the state, perhaps. I'm wondering if we've run into this problem before.
Yeah. So first off, when North Dakota has been in growth mode in the past, typically the rest of the country has been in recession. And so there were a lot of people looking for work and willing to come here and even, live in their car in order to get the job. That's not the case today. There are substantial, unemployment benefits in place to ease them out of the recession, the pandemic-related recession. Also, when we were in fast growth mode before, we didn't have as many competitors in the South. And so, there's a tendency for people to take those jobs since they are less seasonal and to stay there. And so we're finding it hard to get that workforce to move, out of unemployment or out of another state into North Dakota. And I don't know that we've ever really faced a situation quite like this before, where we had this level of competition, and we also had, a recovering economy around the rest of the nation that was allowing people to find work at home and not move to North Dakota. And at one time, a lot of North Dakota's oil and gas workforce were super commuters. May end up going back to that, where frac crews and rig crews are flown in and out and live somewhere else. But that's not a really efficient way to do business. So yeah, it is I think a new challenge for us to try to overcome. And it takes a lot of time to train and grow a workforce, a local workforce. So.
Great. I think we'll shift over to Justin to say
Okay.
that.
Good to go. Okay. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Justin Krinkstead, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. As Lynn alluded to, not a lot of change between April and May. Again, very consistent production still trickling down to those two neighboring states. 0 operating rigs still today in both of those two neighboring regions. It will likely take some incremental price levels and folks looking for additional acreage opportunities to start ramping up, particularly in that eastern Montana area. When we look at the month-to-month changes, again, just for visual, those who like the visual side of the world, again, growth in both aspects, but minor compared to what we've seen as far as changes historically. Just some minor shifts as well on how crude oil was leaving the region. I do have some details I'll dig into here a bit on the rail side, but we did see an uptick on pipeline movements out of the region from a percentage basis. When we look at slide 5, again, that Brent WTI spread sub $5 in the month of May. We saw an uptick in the market share of crude oil leaving by pipeline. We have been seeing continual shrinking market share of barrels moving north into Canada by truck. And so those with adequate pipeline capacity, with production levels where they are today, those barrels are finding a home on either the Enbridge system, True, Double H, or Dakota Access as they find pipeline markets out of the region. In slide 6, not too much to talk about here, at least on just a statewide volume. Very consistent, again, right around that 200,000 barrels per day leaving the region by rail car. What was interesting on slide 7 was, at least for April, the most recent information available from the EIA was a sharp continued uptick in where those barrels are leaving as they exit North Dakota by rail car. And so you can see declining market share heading towards Pad 1 or the East Coast area, and then continued market share increases for those barrels going to the Pacific Northwest. I did a little bit of digging after seeing these numbers of what was happening in Pad 1. So Pad 1 again is East Coast of the US. There are no direct pipeline routes from really anywhere, particularly in North Dakota, to get barrels to those refineries on the East Coast. Those refineries are bound either to take crude by rail deliveries or waterborne deliveries. And so when digging into this, what's been backfilling that Pad 1 volume was three primary countries: Algeria, Nigeria, 2 OPEC countries, and then Russia was the other one that was delivering crude oil to those East Coast refineries. So just an interesting, backstory to everything that's going on there. How will this continue to evolve over time? It's difficult to say, but again, I would continue to see that Pacific Northwest be the prominent destination for our crude oil here going forward. When we look at pricing, as far as April, similar story, Pad 1, Pad 5, highest price markets. Again, it does cost a little bit more to get your barrel by rail car to the East Coast. One thing we did see though in that April-May timeframe was relatively strong netbacks on the pipeline side. So it's not that when you look at that story, you might think, well, was the East Coast not wanting to purchase Bakken crude oil, or was that Bakken crude oil not wanting to go to the East Coast because they were able to find better marketplaces? And I would think it would be the latter. There were adequate pipeline capacity, good netbacks on the pipelines, and so again, finding those homes on the pipe was likely causing better economics for those barrels. Then slide 9, again, that Brent WTI spread just over $2. So we're going to continue to see those barrels get pushed and fill the pipes as much as they can. And then another interesting trend down when I was switching this up from month to month, that LLS pricing, which is one of the light sweet crude grades down in the Gulf Coast, that was over $2 premium to WTI a month ago. Now it's sitting at 67 cents. And so for those barrels leaving North Dakota, being marketed as a light sweet barrel down in the Gulf Coast, that might be some incremental pressure on that pricing. So we'll see here in the coming months if we see any type of shifting of those barrels, where they're headed, whether they're going to the Gulf, whether they're going to the Great Lakes, whether they get on rail cars, we'll see. But that is relatively weak spread there between that Cushing and the Gulf Coast for a light sweet barrel. Very consistent import exports, that delta, the difference between the imports exports is typically what I watch for. Again, very consistent, very flat trends here as we switch into the natural gas world. So Lynn had mentioned a 1% uptick in flaring for the month of May. That 1% did come from wells that were connected to pipeline systems. That's going to continue to be a challenge for the foreseeable future. Again, as wells are aging, gas oil ratios are increasing, but as you continue to add wells, those child wells that Lynn was discussing, typically those get tied into the same gathering systems. And so if systems were designed for parameters that seemed reasonable 5 years ago, whereas advancements in completions and everything else, those pipeline systems continue to be challenged. And making sure that every molecule has a place to move is critical. So we'll keep an eye on that, but it is a challenge that is going to be ongoing for the foreseeable future. Slide 12, we'll skip through that. Again, that's just that pie chart over time. And then again, good news in the month of May for new wells getting connected to gas gathering. That did outpace just slightly the new wells producing natural gas. So again, we'd like to see that black line stay ahead of it, or at least at a minimum on par with the new wells producing natural gas. The EIA did update their price outlook here earlier in the month of July. They had given about a $5 increase to their nearer term oil price outlook. That was obviously before the OPEC meeting here a few days ago. So we'll see what their August outlook looks like. Obviously, there's at least a $4 to $6 haircut that the market took here yesterday. And that will likely be reflected then as we get those August outlooks here in a few more weeks. The gas oil ratio is slide 15. I just put this in for context. I know Lynn speaks about it, I speak about it, but it really is something that we're going to continue to watch and monitor and build into our outlooks for gas capture in North Dakota. The interesting thing we have on the left side of that graphic is a bit of history from the Bakken formation. Not a lot of folks are familiar, but there was horizontal Bakken drilling taking place in the late 80s, early 90s in North Dakota. That was, however, prior to hydraulic fracturing and the other developments that made it economic in today's, compared to what is being done today on the field. But what that did allow us to do is to look back at previous Bakken production and say, how did the wells age? How did that gas oil ratio react over time? And should we reasonably expect the same type of thing to happen in the future? And so I'm expecting that, yes, I think it is reasonable for us to think that we get up closer to that 3.8 to almost 4 gas oil ratio. So that's 4 or 3.8, that's 1,000 cubic feet for every barrel of oil produced. So a 3.8 GOR is 3,800 cubic feet of gas produced for every barrel of oil. That's what that ratio is referencing. And so you can see over time, when the Bakken development came in the mid 2000s, that gas oil ratio kind of reset because of the higher volumes. We've seen that same uptick taking place. And so we're not up at the top of that curve, and we're going to continue to expect to see this gas oil ratio increasing over time. And so what that means, when we look out on slide 16, these are some revised forecasts that are just coming out here really today publicly, and then kind of will be baked into a lot of my future work. Previous forecasts were not as aggressive on that gas oil ratio, so I've corrected some of those discrepancies in the model. And so you're seeing now, even with lower oil production being forecasted than what I would have been forecasting a year or two ago, we still see even stronger natural gas growth in that relationship to the crude oil. So all of that said, we certainly still have a tremendous amount of infrastructure needed to stay on top of the gas capture challenge in North Dakota. Likely today's infrastructure will be adequate for a period of, we'll call it 18 to 24 months. After that, we will need these additional plants coming online, the suspended facility potentially coming online, and then other infrastructure advancements, trying to find ways to use that product in state, finding additional outlet options. All of those things right now are on the table. And then the last thing we'll take a look at is just our kind of monthly update on Northern Border. You'll see that here as of late, we're about 75% of Northern Border's flow exiting North Dakota is from North Dakota's gas processing facilities. We continue to see that trend downward of Canadian gas coming on that system. The one interesting thing you'll see here on slide 19, you've heard me and Lynn talk about this repeatedly now for a number of years, is talking about the energy content at Glenoland as that North Dakota gas exits. What's interesting is that you saw my last graphic with our market share increasing. Intuitively, you would think that BTU level would continue to ratchet up with it. But what's taking place, I don't have a slide for it, but earlier today I was digging into some of our ethane capture. So we've got an incremental here starting in about the February timeframe to now of about 25 to 30,000 barrels a day of incremental ethane that North Dakota's gas plants have been pulling out and sending down because of those market dynamics Lynn was talking about. When crude oil prices are higher, NGL prices are higher, and instead of rejecting ethane into Northern Border, there's today a value for it, and we're seeing producers and gatherers capture that ethane and get it sent down to Kansas, either for storage and separation there or continued on to the Gulf Coast. So we'll see again how permanent that is, but that has added some relief to the discussion surrounding Northern Border and some of the capacity and heat challenges on that system. Then the last thing I'll comment on is just, again, many of you likely saw the announcements and the discussion last month, but this project now is underway. with anticipated time frame of in-service either late this year or the first part of next year. So this is again a major piece of infrastructure to connect north and south of the lake and provide those incremental volumes of capacity for new processing facilities, gathering, everything that has been hamstrung here over the last number of years north of the lake, allowing them incremental expansion capabilities that they did not have before. So exciting project. We'll look forward to seeing that get completed and done in the next 6 months or so. So with that, I will stop and answer any questions.
I got one for you.
Yes.
All roads lead to labor shortage questions.
Yep.
You mentioned the older infrastructure having some effects on flaring challenges and just business in general. With the labor shortage in place, does that kind of thing disincentivize companies from upgrading infrastructure as well? Or are companies still seeing, we need to get in there, we need to fix this regardless of if there are people out there or not?
So the question for those online was asking about labor shortages in the midstream industry as a whole and what's being done out there. And so certainly the midstream sector is needing to continue to develop and address capacity shortages. The labor shortage certainly hits all sectors, but in order for the industry to continue to grow, legacy systems, existing infrastructure is going to need to continue to be expanded, maintained. Pigging operations will continue to have to be very aggressive to clear liquids out of those gathering systems. So no, the labor challenges just add on top of that, but it has not reduced the desire or the importance of getting that type of work completed.
Thank you.
Just to clarify the North Bakken expansion.
Yeah.
Once that comes online, what are your projected effects of that going into service?
Yep. So it's going to be. So the question was, what are the immediate effects? So having immediate access to additional residue gas capacity is going to allow expansion capabilities to occur north of Lake Sakakawea. It's difficult, right now the expansions didn't occur because there wasn't adequate capacity. So it's not, there will be an immediate effect to some degree, but the real impact will be felt in the coming years as expansions, new plants can get developed, and again, that capacity is allowed to go where it needs to go.
And maybe just not necessarily on point follow-up, but in attending some of the Public Service Commission discussion about NSP or Xcel having to spike up their natural gas costs because of what happened in February in Texas. At least one Public Service Commissioner was saying they're talking to Xcel and SP about connecting Northern Border or the North Bakken expansion. Is there room for a utility like an NSP or Xcel to get gas from a processing plant or whatever?
Yeah, so a good question. This was a question about connecting basically Western North Dakota's gas supply to Eastern North Dakota and even into Minnesota. So, currently there is one connection with the WBI system where it does connect through the Mapleton and the Valley expansion that was completed a couple of years ago. However, the capacity on that line is relatively limited. And so WBI has proposed in the past what they're called their Emerson project, which would connect the Tioga area to what's known as Emerson, Minnesota. North Dakota's natural gas could then get on to the Viking pipeline, which I don't know if I've got a good, yeah, I do. There you go. So Emerson is that point right up at the northern Minnesota where the purple Great Lakes system and the brown, slide 17. Yep, where the brown Viking pipeline and Great Lakes come together. So there was a proposal, COVID hit and that project was tabled for the time being, but there still is interest. There's still a number of parties looking at opportunities to get additional gas to those markets on Viking or Great Lakes. Once it gets on Viking, certainly Xcel pulls off of that system into the Grand Forks area, the Fargo area, and then even the Great Lakes market, having an incremental capacity options there. So yes, it is certainly on the table. It's going to take time and commitments on both sides, not only the supply but the demand side as well.
On a different note, what are some of the factors that are driving up natural gas prices?
So the question on the gas markets and, obviously the two big drivers, the summertime and wintertime. You've got the high heating demand in the wintertime. You've got summertime electricity, power burn for high cooling demand in the US. Having optionality for LNG export out of North America is huge as well. The gas prices at a global scale are significantly higher than they are in the US, and so having that marketplace to take some excess or take the pressure off the North American gas market certainly helps as well. So all of those coming together, industrial users and things ramping up after COVID, and then even as we've seen on the crude oil side, all sectors were suppressed over the last 12 to 18 months because of COVID. So these prices will certainly incentivize gas drilling and more gas development. So, will we see it continue to ramp up, or will we see industry react and bring more supply online? We'll see how that plays out, but certainly those demand-driven sides are what is pushing the price up right now.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.